Hello. Today we are going to be reviewing Prince Harry's book, Spare. So to start, I just want to point out the difference between an autobiography and a memoir. So an autobiography focuses on the person's entire life. It focuses on historical truths, and a memoir focuses on a portion of a person's life and focuses on emotional truths. So as such, Spare is going to be a memoir. It focuses on Prince Harry's, emotional truths, and it focuses on the period of his life from about the time of his mother's death up until like his grandmother's death, basically. So this is very much bracketed by death. So that's where we're at. So I think like a bottom line up front thing, my big takeaway from this book was that everybody just needs to be nicer to one another. The royal family needs to be nicer. The press needs to be nicer. Prince Harry needs to be nicer. Like everybody just needs to be better people to one another. And this applies to everybody. Everybody in the world just needs to be nicer to one another. It's just the big takeaway. So, all right, jumping in. So I got my notes down here. All right, so the first question I asked myself when approaching this book is, what is Prince Harry's goal in writing this book? So what is the author trying to convey? What is their goal? Prince Harry tells us that his goal is to get his brother and his father to understand why he left England. So he tells us this within the first 7 pages. He sets it up that he had a talk with them in Frogmore Gardens. And he says, that they were having this talk. They eventually got to the point, and his father and his brother were both, telling him how did you get to this point? Like, why did you leave? And Prince Harry was thinking, really? You don't know? Like, you don't understand how I left? Like, why I felt I had to leave? This is me trying to explain it. So that's the setup for the book. So that was the prologue. And there was this really telling quote at the beginning. I thought it was telling that he wrote, and it's where he describes the old Gothic ruin in Frogmore Gardens in this way. No more Gothic than the Millennium Wheel. Some clever architect, some bit of stagecraft, like so much around here. Some clever stagecraft indeed. So the author, well, Prince Harry and the ghostwriter, if we can call it a ghostwriter since we know who it is, but they had to know that by putting that in there, we would be, thinking, is this another bit of stagecraft coming from a member of the royal family? Is that what this is? As he starts to present this. So, that was lodged in the back of my mind already. So Prince Harry goes on to tell us what he doesn't want to be. He says, people assumed that the Spare wouldn't or shouldn't have any ambition. I didn't want to be one of those cocktail slurping, eye-roll causing sloths everyone avoided at family gatherings. He talks about wanting to find his own way. He talks about, the opposition he found himself in oftentimes with his brother, Prince William, and how, he'd rather it wasn't that way. And if it were up to him, was the implication, like it wouldn't be that way. And, those are admirable traits. So, giving him the benefit of the doubt, if that's the case, like, okay, great. And then, he writes this. Being royal, it turned out, wasn't all that far from being on stage. Acting was acting, no matter the context. So he said that in reference to being at Eton, he had to perform in a play in order to graduate. So I guess you have to be at least in one play to graduate Eton, is what he was saying. And so that was his takeaway, that being royal isn't all that far from being on stage, which seems like a pretty valid takeaway to me. And so that brought up to me, so for a man who dedicated his book to his mother and who is saying that authenticity is important and who is, invoking, this parental figure, are you in this book, and have you throughout the course of your life, been authentic to who you wanted to be? How good of a job did you do at that? Are you discovering that you did a good job at that as you write this book? Are you saying, you know, you're trying to do better? Like how is that playing out in the writing of this book? Like, so, you know, that's going on. Because I know, you know, with my own mom, you know, she definitely wants what's best for me, and she wants me to be authentic to myself. She's always told me, like, hey, I don't need to do something just because you think I want you to do it. I want you to do it because you want to do it. So, you know, that question is he being authentic to himself? Is he being authentic to his own conscience? Is that what he's doing? Or is he worrying about what other people think, you know, a lot of the time? I mean, who cares? Who cares what other people think? It seemed in the book that, you know, a lot of the times he does. He very much cares that other people are thinking certain very erroneous things about him. And so that was concerning, but also like sad, you know, that you'd be stuck in this position where so much of the world cares and so many people are putting out lies about you, which, you know, we have to varying degrees, although not to such a great extent. So further into the book, I was asking, you know, does Harry want to live a normal life? He would say that. He would say, I can't be normal. He talks about how the paparazzi won't leave him alone. He wishes they would. He wants to deploy. He wants to be a soldier, and he wants to have at least some normal experiences. So, you know, he talks about how right after his passing out, which is his becoming an officer right after having made it through their version of like basic training, that some closely held private information about him and his brother was leaked to the press. And so that resulted in a highly toxic environment. And he said that the suspicion became really toxic, and he wrote, "What a relief it will be, I thought, to be in a proper war zone where none of this is part of my daily calculus. Please put me on a battlefield where there are clear rules of engagement, where there's some sense of honor." So first, the author did a great job. Again, the ghostwriter did a great job. You know, it was spaced very dramatically to increase the emotional impact. I think it would have a big emotional impact anyway. I think it deserves to have a big emotional impact. You know, most of us don't have to deal with being in a position where, you know, such things are of interest to most people, or that, you know, people would be looking for this on a regular basis, and we would, you know, have to be concerned about this. So, I mean, how disappointing that you would, you know, be in a position where you might suspect your closest friends of, you know, possibly leaking something to the press for money. So that is an unfortunate position to be in. One of the things that's nice about books and being able to, you know, to visit a book is that, you know, you can learn things from it, you know, how you want to be, how you don't want to be. One of the things that I love to read is fantasy novels, and fantasy novels have oftentimes like a loyal friend, a loyal servant, you know, somebody that the hero can count on. So, you know, you think of, you know, Sam and Frodo, Legolas and Gimli, Pepper Potts and Tony Stark, Stephen Bucky. Going to the Bible, like Naomi and Ruth, David and Jonathan. I mean, that's a good one right there. You know, David was anointed to be the next king, but Jonathan was the son of the king. You know, so a very strong dynamic there. But really good friends, despite, you know, what was going on there. And so, you know, Penelope and Odysseus, Holmes and Watson, the Three Musketeers, you know, there's a very strong desire, basically, that you can have somebody you can trust in your life. And at that time, he didn't have that. I mean, the bottom line is everybody wants a Horton. You know, what is it? I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. An elephant's faithful 100%. You know, you want that person in your life. And there were a lot of times when he didn't have that. And there were a lot of times when he couldn't even turn to family, you know, the people who are supposed to be closest to you and that you're supposed to be able to trust the most, to have his back. And so that's very disappointing. How terrible to not have someone. So Harry goes on to talk about his deployments. And he talks about the changes he sees in himself as a result. And he talks about the workings of the royal family. At one point, he says that the papers had taken to calling his brother work-shy Wills, and he talks about how that was grossly unfair because Willie was raising a family, having kids, and so that was going on. And then he also went on to point out how, due to the way that the royal family is set up, that his father controls all of the money for the family and decides, what engagements they can do and how many they can do and that sort of thing. And basically said that his brother did as much as Pa wanted him to do. And sometimes that wasn't much because Pa and Camilla didn't want Willie and Kate getting loads of publicity. Pa and Camilla didn't like Willie and Kate drawing attention away from them or their causes. So this is the family dynamic that he's setting up in this book. So then looking at the deployments, it struck me because he was saying, I want to be normal. I want to have these normal experiences. He was talking about his first deployment and he said, I had to sneak aboard the plane to go to Afghanistan. So he was originally set to go to Iraq. He couldn't go to Iraq because the press got a hold of it. And then, of course, the terrorists in Iraq were saying, we're going to kill you. This is going to be great. We're going to do all these terrible things to you. So, how awful to live in a place where you have to hear that they are specifically targeting you. That, the anxiety, the cortisol, that would be awful. But so he gets to go to Afghanistan. They kind of smuggle him aboard in a secret, part of a plane, nobody knows he's going at first. And before he gets off the plane, he goes, well, of course they gave me a bottle of morphine because it's going to be really dangerous and I might need it. So maybe it's different for British soldiers. Maybe every British soldier gets a vial of morphine when they deploy. If that's the case, I would really like to hear about it. If you know that that's the case, or if it's not the case, if you would let me know that, I would appreciate it. But I can tell you that American soldiers do not all get a vial of morphine just because they're going into a very dangerous situation, such as that. You have to hope that the medic will be there for you. So that was very unrealistic. And, he wants to have all these normal experiences, but it pointed out to me how abnormal, this was. He wants to deploy, he gets to deploy, he gets morphine. There's a lot of special considerations that happened. And it was the same for his second deployment in Afghanistan. So he wanted to do a second deployment. This was the place that he felt most normal, where people are trying to kill him, which I think is a telling psychological factor. And in order to do that, they need him to be in a job where he can be safer than what he was doing. And so they're like, hey, you can be a helicopter pilot. So again, I do not know how it works for the British military, but I have some familiarity with how it works for the American military. And there are way more people who want to be pilots than get to be pilots, even if they qualify to be pilots. So, you first, for the most part, you have to have a college degree. There's all of these things that you have to do in order to even be considered. And, he's Prince Harry, he wants to be a pilot. And so, he hasn't gone to college. They get him 4 different flight instructors, 3 or 4. And, he gets the private instruction, then he gets to go fly, once he passes all these things, he gets to go join the class, and then he gets to fly a helicopter. So again, all of these abnormal things have to happen in order for him to get to feel normal for a little bit. It struck me as very much, out of touch. I'm glad that he got to experience that in a way. He got to see what that was like, but at the same time, I don't know that his takeaways were entirely what they needed to be, for understanding what everybody else was going through, if that makes sense. Okay. So the third and final part of the book was all about Prince Harry meeting Meghan Markle. And he calls her Megs. So he writes a lot about his great distress at the press's treatment of Megs. And I think it is admirable that he wants to protect his wife in such a way, and that he wants to protect his family. That is an admirable trait. That is a good and well-ordered desire. So he writes about that, and he again like vehemently states that he disagrees with the way the rest of the royal family approaches and treats the press. We get a little bit of insight into, you know, some of the people who work for the royal family, some of the dynamics there. So the way, there's two ways that he says that the royal family approaches the press, and then, but the one that I wrote down was, ignore them, they'll go away eventually as long as you don't react. That's what the palace says to do. So, so he says that, but he's, you know, he writes very often throughout the book that he disagrees with that. He does not agree with that approach. He thinks that, you know, you should fight, you should sue, you know, you should go after them, and there should be repercussions for the lies that they're spreading, which I don't necessarily disagree, but he does not, he puts himself at odds with the royal family in that way. However, later on, he writes about his interactions with the people when they're out and they're doing tours before they get married, and he talks about how much the people love Meghan, and you know, they say all these nice things about her, and he calls it a total departure from the tone and tenor of the tabloids, and also a reminder the British press wasn't reality. So sometimes he seems to get it, like, you know, people are not entirely listening to the tabloids, who are, you know, calling Meg all these terrible things apparently. And there's all these people who do like Meghan. So sometimes he understands that, but a lot of the time he does not. So that was interesting to me. Then he ends the book by going on to talk about a lot of the family infighting, and then he provides some details about his last moments with his grandmother, the Queen, and then he talks about her death. And then, yeah, the final memories, which were, you know, quite poignant. So the, you know, for kind of final analysis, you know, looking at this as a whole, basically, it seems throughout the book that he's telling himself this story about, you know, how awful his life has been and how unfair things have been. And it was a reminder to me. So, you know, the takeaway that you get from books, you know, that's one of the fun things about reading. You know, it teaches you things. And this was a big reminder to me that the things that we tell ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, especially about our lives and things that are going on in them, is very important. So the stories that we tell ourselves affect, you know, how we deal with what's going on in our lives, how we approach them. And so it's important that we watch out the way that we're thinking about things, because it shapes the way we deal with things. And so the other thing that I was thinking about is that, you know, the life isn't fair approach. So whenever I hear, you know, life isn't fair, I go to Snape and Harry Potter. So there's this quote in the movie where he tells Potter that, you know, life isn't fair. And it's this big moment. And, you know, so Snape knew that. Prince Harry knows that. But, like, that's about where that resemblance stops. So Prince Harry, like, I don't know, he seems more like Gilderoy Lockhart to me. Like, out of touch, you know, kind of flashy. He has the looks, he's got the money. Whereas, you know, Snape, you know, didn't have the looks, didn't have the money. He didn't have any of those benefits. But Snape was loyal to Dumbledore, and Lockhart was only loyal to himself. So the other thing about Snape was that, like, Snape understood, like, you know, hey, like, my choices and what I did got me to where I'm at. So, like, I only have myself to blame for what happened here. There are all these external circumstances. You know, I had a shitty childhood. You know, this stuff happened, but I chose to respond in this way, and that's how I ended up here. So, like, we are so often complicit in certain things, like, you know, how we end up in certain situations. And Snape understood that. and Prince Harry did not. So, which I guess does make them similar in one other way, in that they're both, you know, they can both be tragic figures. But, you know, they both ostensibly have somebody or something outside of themselves, you know, that is, you know, worth living for, that is very powerful, and that matters more to them than themselves. And Snape used that as a stepping stone to make better decisions. And I, like, you know, I don't know if Prince Harry is doing that or not. You know, it's unclear as to whether that's happening. So, you know, it would be nice to think that the choice to come to North America was, you know, Prince Harry trying to take responsibility, you know, for his family and trying to make things better. But what it looks like is more his trying to take control of, you know, his life and his circumstances, which is totally understandable. You know, you want to have control of your life and your circumstances, you know, you, especially when, you know, if your wife is getting death threats, if your baby's getting death threats. I don't remember if he said both were, but, you know, if these things are happening, then you know, you want to do something to, you know, protect yourself and your family, obviously. And so, I don't know, it seems to me like he was trying to take control in that effort, and which again is very valid. I've never had to deal with that. I've never had to live in a fishbowl. Nobody cares about me at all. So, yay, there's something to be said for that. And for everybody who wants to be famous, like, maybe not, maybe you don't. That might be a very good lesson. However, I mean, you know, Prince Harry has been dealt some bad cards, but he's also been dealt some pretty great cards, and it would be nice to see those acknowledged at some point in this book. And it didn't feel like they were. I mean, this is a very emotional book. You know, the memoirs are very emotional. Like, I'm talking about my emotional truths. Like, this is what I'm sharing. Well, my emotional takeaway was, like, he does not acknowledge, like, all of the good things that he had in his life. Like, he minimizes them as much as he can throughout this book, you know, saying like, oh yeah, I gotta live in these great houses, but like, I'm just like, I was eating like fish sticks like everybody else. Like, you're missing the point, dude. Like, you will, like, if you don't want to, like, you will never have to worry about healthcare. Like, you will never die alone. Like, you don't have to worry about, like, so many of these things that other people, it's a very real concern. Like, you don't have to worry about it. Like, you can call up, I think it was Tyler Perry, and borrow his house. Like, okay, so yeah. I mean, one of the things though is that, I mean, trauma can prevent us from seeing these very important things. And of course, you know, he has had a lot of trauma in his life. You know, his mother died, his parents were divorced. You know, he has this very challenging family dynamic. So there is some trauma in there. There's a lot of trauma in there. That's blinding him to that. The Proverbs 17:22 came to my mind, and it's, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. And I wondered, how often did he have a chance at a joyful heart before the trauma came? And perhaps, like, you know, the little insults and emotional injuries that he suffered throughout his life, and squashed all of that. And then Proverbs 7:17, a few verses earlier, tells us, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. And it made me think, you know, what he needed, and perhaps what he still needs, is that loyal friend, you know, that Horton, that person who can be there by his side. And he did say later on in the book that, you know, they found out that the friends, you know, did not, you know, betray him. Like, so, you know, perhaps he does not have a family that he can turn to, but, you know, he might still have those friends who he can trust. And I know for a lot of us, you know, we might not be able to rely on our family. You know, our family might have, you know, emotionally abandoned us, physically abandoned us, you know, whatever. And so our found family are, you know, the friends that we make along the way are very important to us. Found family is a huge trope in, you know, young adult, middle grade, and adult fantasy. You know, for that reason, a lot of us are walking around with trauma. So I think you need to acknowledge, you know, that people are going through trauma, but, you know, as an adult, you have to you have to figure that out. You have to own it, and you have to like figure out how to work through that and get to where you can be healthy, with or without your family, So I think that needed to be acknowledged in a way that was not. So I did want to say, like, most people don't believe the press. They like to hear the little gossipy things. They like those little scintillating details, and then they forget about it and they go about their day. Oh, did you hear someone, like, this is what they're saying about so-and-so. I don't, like, that's, like, if I see a magazine in the grocery store, like, it's like, oh, is that what they're saying now? Like, that's funny. Like, but it's not, like, I don't accept it as true, whether it is or not. It's something that the magazines are saying. How many people actually believe the news? I mean, I don't. My family doesn't. Like, this is not something I hear. Like, whether it's the news, whether it's the gossip magazines, anything. Like, that's not the society we live in anymore. I think, like, there was something that came out, it was like 2002 or 2004. They were doing the trust surveys, and like, since that year, like, people trust their family members and will listen to what they're saying more than they listen to, like, the news. Like, so people will go to a blog to get information before they will go to, like, CNN, ABC, MSNBC, like, because it has dropped off so precipitously. So it's just the fact that he's dwelling on this so much seemed out of touch for that. And then I was also really saddened that there wasn't a single word about Prince Harry's faith mentioned in this book. He does mention other people's faith. He specifically mentions his father and his father praying regularly, for example. And, I find that sad because the faith is a source of great comfort for me. And it's a source of great comfort to a great many people. As a Christian, I recognize that, my earthly father can fail me, but, my heavenly father does not. And one of the things that popped into my head was a verse from the hymn, "Baptized into your name, most holy." And it goes, "My faithful God, you fail me never. Your promise surely will endure. Oh, cast me not away forever, if words and deeds become impure. Have mercy when I come defiled. Forgive, lift up, restore your child." So family relationships are the ones most likely to be expected to ignore and forgive things like abuse, abandonment, and neglect. But staying in those relationships without resolving what happened often results in things like, depression, anxiety, resentment, sadness, grief. And maintaining those relationships can only exacerbate those emotions a lot of the time, along with our other issues. So that leads me to the next topic that I wish was addressed more in the memoir, which is mental health. So he does eventually see a therapist, thankfully. And this isn't on him because he was a kid at the time, but it is concerning that a therapist was not provided for him as a child. So, especially at his mother's death, he should have had one. But even before that, when his parents were divorced, you should go see a therapist. There's a lot of trauma there. You could say that, it's the royal family. It might have been difficult. Like, dude, it's the royal family. Like, it should have been easy to find somebody who could keep their mouth shut. Especially, like, you will lose your license as a therapist if you go tell anybody about that. Like, so if you want work, it shouldn't have been that hard. So it would have been good. It would have been a good thing. They would have found him a good therapist, to kind of talk about these concerns with, especially because, a childhood divorce can carry around a lot of guilt regarding, both parents, because they want to make both parents happy. They love both parents. They don't want to hurt either parent. And there can be a lot of, because there's so much resentment between the two parents, a lot of times, it can be difficult to say, nice things about them. So, like, that's rough. Hey, little girl. We got a little visitor. So it does sound like Prince Harry was, emotionally abandoned and neglected. I mean, it took me 6 weeks to read this book, in part because, like, I had to keep taking breaks because he does put so much emotion on this page. I mean, that was rough for me. But again, like, one of the things that we get from books is the knowledge that dragons can be defeated. So, hopefully, people are coming into this and saying, okay, this happened, these things are going on, what went well in this book, what went poorly for him, how if I'm in a similar situation, could I make my life go better if I'm facing similar things? So that takeaway that dragons can be defeated is very important. Okay, so one of the problems with memoirs is that they are an effort to shape the way that other people see you. As such, they cannot be entirely trusted except where like exterior facts can be corroborated. However, like at the very beginning of this memoir, Prince Harry gives himself an out for that. So this is what he writes. Whatever the cause, my memory is my memory. It does what it does, gathers and curates as it sees fit, and there's just as much truth in what I remember and how I remember it as there is in so-called objective facts. So, I mean, we all do feel certain ways about different events, different things that are going on. So, like, I understand in a way what he's trying to say about this. You know, like, this is the way I feel about these things that happened. And, you know, this is how I feel about these events. But at the same time, like, we cannot be ruled by our feelings. That doesn't work. You know, that's how people end up murdering other people. They get angry and they allow themselves to be ruled by their feelings, or, you know, they experience, you know, lust or desire for somebody else and they're already married, and, you know, they throw away their wedding vows. Like, that's no way to live. So, you know, you can't be ruled by your feelings. It's not a healthy way to live. It's not a smart way to live. And it's not a good way to treat other people necessarily, which isn't to say you want to deny your feelings. You want to acknowledge them. You want to figure out why you're having them. But then you do want to classify them as, you know, this is a good feeling. This is one I don't want to act on. So you need to be careful with how that is. So overall, like, I found this book very difficult to read. It was very self-justifying. He came across to me as out of touch a lot of the time. Still, you know, the writing was very good. It was the ghostwriter did an excellent job. You know, you can't help but feel for him. You know, I feel bad for what he went through. I feel bad for, you know, the family dynamic and the way that he feels about it. So I think he conveyed in a way what he wanted to. You know, like, if you've read it, you know, what do you think? Do you think Prince Harry accomplished what he wanted to in writing this book? I'm curious. Let me know in the comments below. Thanks. Bye.